Moving to our top story today, much of the Madlanga Commission's focus has been on detailing the events leading up to and the alleged reasons why KwaZulu-Natal's political killings task team was disbanded, nearly a year ago now. Outspoken Provincial Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi has been emphatic that the team's performance is worth applause, and now suspended Minister Senzo Mchunu had no business interfering in the unit's business, allegedly without the president's knowledge thereof. And that the push to get rid of the PKTT was all to shield members of the so-called Big Five criminal syndicate who had infiltrated themselves in the very police establishment. But if we pause, right, and just consider the very evidence table before the commission itself regarding the PKTT's effectiveness, that's the text in black and white, all the statistics, has it really been all that impressive and worthwhile? Well, the person who's been tasked to look into that is, of course, Jean Redpath. She's a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, UWC, and she argues that the stats, they just don't lie. She joins me live on the line now. Jean, thank you so much for taking time for us here on The Lead today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I know it's a very busy time of day and the commission's just restarted its affairs, although in camera for the next couple of witnesses, apparently, so media won't really be able to know, the public won't be able to know what the next witnesses are saying. But you really took this vital opportunity whilst the parliamentary sort of mirrored inquiry, or the ad hoc committee has been busy, ventilating sort of the same evidence thus far. You took this opportunity as the break from Madlanga to really have a discerning look at the submissions handed to the commission itself. What spurred you to do this?
So what actually happened is one of the news stations asked me to do an interview, a panel interview over the weekend, and they've sent all of us, I believe, the annexures. So I assumed that was going to be the topic of the discussion on the panel, and I diligently looked at the annexures, and I was quite surprised and shocked that they hadn't yet been discussed in the commission by the evidence leaders. They hadn't been raised at all. And so and then actually in the television interview, there wasn't much emphasis, and I had to bring it into the conversation. I then decided that perhaps people needed to know about this if it wasn't going to be raised either at the commission or at the ad hoc committee, because in fact we'd actually already heard from both the General Mkhwanazi and Masemola in both venues at that stage, and at neither of them had the expenditure been looked at in any kind of detail. And we had these kind of blanket assertions that the task team had been effective. And I looked into the reports on that too.
Sure, because, Mkhwanazi was basically stating that the conviction rate, and we'll get to this in more detail, I'm sure, in the next few, but that the conviction rate was around the 30% mark, but yet the evidence of what's being submitted, for formal representation sort of in the background, that doesn't sort of get ventilated an awful lot, as you say, in terms of what people are saying into the microphone. That is a different story.
Yes, so, I mean, the report that I looked at in detail was to mid-2021, which was because the annexures ran to hundreds of pages, so it's a lot to go through, and there was a lot of repetition in those annexures. What you see there in the 2021 report is a kind of consolidation of how many people and what had happened so far with their investigations. Now, I have a great deal of sympathy with General Mkhwanazi when he expresses frustration with the prosecution and with the court. So I understand that, there are constraints on that side. And in fact, that's part of my work, is also looking at the prosecution and the police. But if we compare after 3 years, what the task team was able to do and the usual sort of throughput rate that was in the public domain back in 2019, 2020, we see that it's not that much different. The South Africa throughput rate at the time was around 13%, and the task team at that point had done 17%. So it's true that cases take more than a year to go through. So all we're really looking at is how many convictions in a year and how many actual murders were committed in a year. And we're just comparing those two figures, and we're asking, does that really match up? Do the convictions match up to what we actually faced with? Now, it is also true that KwaZulu-Natal at that time, I think it's improved now, but at that time had a particularly bad throughput ratio of around 8%. So in his context, it is correct that the task team was doing better than otherwise. But then one has to ask, well, what was it costing to do this better work? And that is the essence of my question, is why is it not possible for ordinary police who are earning their ordinary salaries to investigate these cases? So that is where the angle of my article is really going, is that why do we need to pay overtime, accommodation, daily stipends, laundry, in order to get a slightly improved conviction sort of throughput? Why is it not possible to just leave this to the serious and violent crime units or even to the Hawks? Why is it necessary to have a very expensive task team to do this work?
Yes, and so are South Africans really getting bang for their buck is ultimately the question. If the president's going, I would like this particular unit to be put together in a province which seemingly has a problem, it's getting a lot of resources, it's getting a lot of money, it's getting a lot of sort of power, if you will. And so we as taxpayers, do we sort of just accept that this goes into that big treasure trove of millions upon billions that get spent within the budget, and then that's okay? Or, if you're saying that the PKTT is definitely something that brings back gains at the end of the day, well, let's look at that budget a lot closer. And I think the context is going to come key here when we look at the SAPS budget as a whole, Jean, before we get into the minutiae of the PKTT itself. What does that budget say if we talk about irregular spending? And you so expertly describe it very simply, the other side of the line item of the SAPS budget, which runs into the billions, right?
Yes. So the interesting thing is, back in March, April, May, when we were having as a nation this huge issue around the VAT increase and the fact that we were going to have to raise VAT by 0.5% in order to make ends meet effectively. I had a closer look at the budgets of the entities that I'm interested in, to see if where the money was going and if any savings were possible there. And I was very puzzled to find under the table of the police that deals with personnel numbers and their cost, that there was an entry for 8 funded posts, which the total cost was 8.5 billion, not million, billion,
sure.
Which in the documentation works out to 1.70 billion each for each of those posts. Now, obviously, this cannot be correct. There cannot be 8 people in the SAPS earning, 1 billion.
Unless they're the president, or even then.
This must be the discretionary expenditure around overtime and these kinds of expenditures that we see for the task team. However, I couldn't get anyone to actually confirm that this was the case. So I'm not sure if that is correct. This is what I'm surmising, that this is the kind of place where all this money, which brings us to the question was, where is the 8.5 billion going? I mean, this task team, 200 and something million over 3 years, is a drop in the ocean compared to the 8.5 billion. So it's a kind of an indicator, beginning of an opening into where a lot of the money is going. Now, I mean, 8.5 billion is a lot of money. I think people don't really have a sense of the totals that we're talking about here. It's a great deal of money, and a lot could be done with it. I mean, I began my conflict with the police around the resources, the allocation of resources to police stations. And every single police station will tell you they don't have enough people, they don't have enough vehicles, they don't have enough fuel for the vehicles. And then we see all of this money being spent in this way, largely unaccounted for, because it's not laid out in the annual report, all the spending on task teams. It's not really dealt with in Parliament. So how is there accountability over these expenditures? Do we just leave it in the hands of the National Commissioner as the accounting officer in terms of the PFMA? Or is there actually a role for the minister to say these are the priorities of our government or not? And maybe it's violence against women are our priorities. Maybe we want to spend money there. Maybe we shouldn't have such a big discretionary amount. Maybe it should be more closely allocated by Parliament exactly what all the expenditure is for. So these are important questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to, but I think that they are particularly questions that Parliament needs to look at. Are they able to do their oversight job? Do they really know where all the money is going? And are these the priorities of the democratically elected government, in fact?
Right. So, excellently put, Jean. And you really are going to the heart of it. And it's so interesting when you juxtapose everything that you've just so excellently, concisely put with the fact that Mkhwanazi and the rest have told Parliament that, in actual fact, police powers should be devolved to the provinces as well. So what does that say when it comes down to the budgets as well that are already looking like this? And just two other comments to your points regarding Parliament at the moment. I mean, my colleague Jan Gerber is a senior parliamentary correspondent. He wasn't happy with the level of questions that were brought anyway in the ad hoc committee thus far in terms of the evidence. He feels like it's not critical enough. And in actual fact, their own parliamentarians have already pointed to the fact that when Mkhwanazi was brought to Parliament initially, that no one really, sounded the alarm when it came to Mkhwanazi's initial claims of this mysterious brown Mahotsi fellow. So a lot of questions there. Let's go down now into the minutiae of the PKTT, Jean. It's clear, look, they got a lot more resources here than most. They got a lot of vehicles. They got some senior people to join the unit from the outset, because let's be frank, the instruction came from the union buildings. So let's break down the costs, as you so expertly put, within the first 6 months of the PKTT, and then let's sort of expand from there and then move to the caseload and what that looks like in terms of the overall sort of budget spend. So let's begin with the 6 months. $500,000 for laundry, right?
Yes, so I'm not actually even sure which policy of the SAPS permits that to be an expenditure for a task team. It's the whole kind of the budget overall with the line items for accommodation, transport, etc., suggests a temporary situation where people are having to be away from home. But this went on for 6 years, and this task team was in 5 different regions in KwaZulu-Natal, so they were spread out, so they were not all together in one place. Another puzzling aspect is initially in the first 6 months, only 5 detectives from the detective service, plus 2 from the Hawks, out of 139 members. Now, you're supposed to be investigating political killings, but you have so few investigators, like 1 per region. It just doesn't add up in terms of the ostensible aim of the unit. So that's where my concern really lay with. Are we continuing to pay for people to be in accommodation after 6 years? In hotels, or where they're staying, etc. So it's disturbing that this was rolled over year after year. Once or twice you can see General Masemola saying, maybe not this item this time, and maybe a little bit less here. And in terms of the vehicles, it was quite clearly stated that the budget for the 30 vehicles would come from police stations, from the police station budget in those areas. Now, KwaZulu-Natal, the data from the Victims of Crime survey shows that people in KwaZulu-Natal are the most likely to say they never see a police vehicle, and they wait the longest for police to come when they need them. And to have 30 vehicles taken away from police station level is significant.
That's less. That's fewer bobbies on the beat. That's less visible policing,
etc., etc. So, and we know that people in KwaZulu-Natal are particularly concerned around that. And so that has to be reassessed. And after 5 years, by the way, they say, oh, you know what? Most of these vehicles are toast now. We need more. So the vehicles literally got used up in 5 years, and they said, oh, they can go back to the police stations. These vehicles that are not suitable for them can go back to the police station. So it's a kind of an entitlement that comes through in the documentation, and a kind of not even an inkling that it might not be approved. It's a sort of a rote reapplication for the funding.
Right. And that overtime cost, Jean, is a very important or a critical point to make, right? Because if you look at it in the breakdown and the figures as you put it in your article, which is currently still doing very well, trending on the front page of News 24, Jean Redpath, Political Killings Task Team, burned millions, whilst KwaZulu-Natal murder rate exploded, and we're going to get to that conviction murder rate ratio in the next short while. But just to stay on the costs, that overtime figure, 16.4 million rand of that first 6 months of a total budget of 49 million rand, and that is one of the bigger line items. It also speaks to this growing culture within South Africa at the moment, because, and I've got a great example, the Mangaung Metro in Bloemfontein has been under national administration for a really long time now because of their terrible finances. They're still not out of the red to this day. It's a lot better now, but they're still not out of the red because overtime costs have become this entrenched culture or idea that, if I work longer, I can just claim for it later. And that's just going to balloon the figure further. And that's just going to make the irregular spending on the line items of the budgets look a lot huger. And it becomes difficult to audit, right? Okay, let's talk about the initial caseload of the dockets that the PKTT was given. What were their successes, and how did this morph over time, Jean, whilst juxtaposing that with the rate of murders or serious crimes in KwaZulu-Natal? And what does this also sort of suggest to you as a senior researcher?
Well, initially there were 67 murders, which were sort of flagged as politically related in some way. I'm not sure what criteria they applied for it to be politically related. And then some additional crimes were added to that, which were also said to be politically related, like intimidation or arson or et cetera, and it went up to 99. Ultimately, after 3 years, I think it was something like 250. When you see, a relatively significant amount resulted in arrests, but the crunch of convictions is just too low. It's just, I think it was 46, if I'm correct. I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's just not. It means that if we just take the extra costs of overtime, etc., it means that each conviction over 3 years cost 4.4 million. Now we cannot spend
that's a lot of money
per conviction. It's just not feasible. And in the documentation, there's also motivation, saying, well, the cases are taking so long in court that our investigators are sitting in court, so we need more investigators who can then be working while the people in court. But the courts don't work like that. The courts, they sit for 1 or 2 days and then it's postponed. They should be having a continuous role, but they're not having a continuous role. So, there was even a push for more. And I do have sympathy with the desperation around the slowness of the courts. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. It negatively affects everybody, particularly the police who have to give evidence. And with that, I'm really on General Mkhonanzi's side when he says that is a problem. But I mean, you're not sitting in court all day. I happen to know that courts only sit for 3 hours a day. So you can't say that your people are, in court all day. They're not. It's just not. It's just not happening. That's not how it's happening in reality. So and then 8 of the suspects died, which is also a little bit, taking aback. That's quite a lot of suspects died. At least one case, they said, was resolved via alternative dispute resolution. Now, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Especially in light of a context of torture in many cases, right?
And quite serious matters of intimidation and arson and so on. It began to sound like if you were a politically connected person and you had a problem, you could call on the task team. That was where it was starting to move towards. I'm not saying it was, but the single ADR case, maybe I'm taking it too far, but that shouldn't be what they're doing. They shouldn't be doing ADRM.
Right. Jean, what's your final recommendation here? Because, I think we've gotten to the heart of the matter thus far. And I think that fact is so pertinent, and it really stuck out in your piece for me, was that 4.4 million rand was spent on each of the single convictions over the span of 3 years. It's such a telling fact. What is your recommendation here out of all of this? Are you saying, look, if you want to keep the unit in future, it needs to scale down its level of spending in order for it to achieve the goals that it had set itself out initially?
No. So what I would appeal to is what we tend to do is we tend to look at things in isolation. Okay, so we tend to look at, is it a good idea to have specialized courts? And we only look at the specialized court and we say, well, yes, the specialized court does better than the non-specialized courts. But what does it cost to, what does it mean that we can't do if we're going to have this thing? What is the cost? What are the what else could we do that might be of more benefit to the citizens? And that's the role of elected government, to say, you know what, this is no longer a priority. This is where our priorities lie. That's not for me to say. It's not for me to say that's, but what's for me to say is to point out that these are the financial priorities that they are making, and for them to be aware that those are the financial priorities. And then the elected government must explicitly choose those priorities and account to Parliament for those choices. I mean, it's scary to me, the size of the line items and the lack of detail that gets revealed at Parliament around this kind of expenditure. So it's not for me to say it should be there or shouldn't be there. All I'm doing is pointing out that the costs, and that part of that cost is that the money isn't spent elsewhere, and part of that cost has been that it's been associated with a worsening of the violent crime situation in the province now, and that is to the whole country violence got worse over that time period, yes, but the situation in KwaZulu-Natal was more than twice as bad.
Sure.
So we've got to ask, maybe the task team was irrelevant to that, but maybe it would have helped if the resources could have been used for public order policing. Our public order unit of the SAPS is actually relatively good. They are not trigger happy. They are well trained, etc., etc. It wasn't public order police who went to Marikana, for example. If public order police had gone there, we might have had a different outcome. So in the July 2021 riots, for example, if we'd had sufficient public order police, citizens wouldn't have felt abandoned. I mean, it's no surprise that people in KwaZulu-Natal trust the police less than elsewhere after that. And people were literally left to themselves. They could not call on the police for help. And so that is the cost is not just the financial cost. It's what you could have spent the money on, where the priorities could have been.
Yes. And I don't think we haven't heard a lot about that. Just to end off, Jean, I mean, you've made your point so beautifully, and it speaks to what I've been thinking throughout this process is like, cool, good and well. We need to get to the heart of the allegations of criminal capture of the country's justice system. But like so many policing experts are saying and have said in the run-up to the commission and Parliament, I would like to hear a little bit more of the operational side of what could be done better, as you say, and better, pooling the resources and the money to get that bang for your buck. The only thing that has spoken to that thus far has been this issue of there's too many chiefs and too few Indians when it comes to SAPS Central Command. And that's been one of the stick-out things for me that has been mentioned on the operational side of things. Like, how does this affect the South African at the end of the day? Is this process of what we're seeing on our TV screens every day and in our, the front page of News 24 and in this very podcast, are all of these going to sort of manifest to creating a better police force in South Africa? And I'm confident we have not reached that conversation yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think, part of the danger with the way that both the ad hoc committee and the commission were defined is that they focused on Nkosazana's allegations. And so we focus on that. And we don't focus on what came just before that, was the Inspector General of Intelligence recommending prosecutions against Khumalo and Masemola,
Which has now become a huge issue.
And that's not discussed because it's not, it's not. So, so far the focus has been, in other words, the narrative has been controlled onto a particular track. By defining it that way, instead of looking at the broader picture, and I agree with Nkosazana that the whole of crime intelligence should start again. We need proper legislation to govern it. And at the moment, crime intelligence just falls under the general intelligence legislation. There isn't police-specific crime intelligence legislation. We need that. We need transparency. We need all these things. And I think if that can come out of the commission and the ad hoc committee, the Parliament can write its own legislation. It doesn't have to wait for government to write it. They have the power to do that. It's called a committee bill. Maybe if that can come out of this, then there'll be some good out of this process. But at the moment, it's looking, there isn't direction. It's looking a little bit all over the place.
Sure, and it makes it a very difficult time for us journalists and researchers to stay abreast and keep track of everything, but you've done an excellent job. Jean Redpath is a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, and her latest piece, just to remind our lead listeners and News 24 subscribers, Political Killings Task Team burned millions whilst KwaZulu-Natal murder rate exploded. Jean, I'm going to let you go. I think you've got many other media interviews waiting, right? Thanks for your time on the lead.
Okay, thanks. Cheers.